25 people disappeared from the face of the earth in a single night. No screaming, no struggle, no footprints in the snow. They were just gone. In the far north of Canada, where the tundra stretches into forever and the cold doesn't ask permission, there is a lake. It has no famous skyline, no recorded history that most people know. Just water, stone, and silence. But on one night in November 1930, something happened at Lake Anjikuni that has never, in nearly 100 years, been fully explained. An entire village vanished. 25 people, men, women, children, every last one of them. And not a single person was ever found. To understand what happened, you first have to understand where it happened.
Lake Anjikuni, sometimes written Angikuni, sits in what is now the Kivalliq region of Nunavut, Canada, one of several lakes threaded along the Kazan River, a stretch of water so remote that the nearest town is days away by foot, even today. The Inuit had lived and fished these shores for generations. They were not careless people. They were methodical, resourceful, and deeply tied to the rhythms of this brutal landscape. They had to be. The Arctic does not forgive mistakes. Every autumn, before the lake froze over, the village would prepare. Dry fish would be hung on wooden racks. Sealskin garments, thick, hand-stitched, essential, would be repaired and folded away. The sled dogs would be fed and watered and tethered near the huts. Every action had a purpose. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was left undone. Joe Labelle knew this village well.
He was a Canadian fur trapper, experienced, weather-hardened, and by most accounts, a practical man, not the kind to tell ghost stories. He had passed through this settlement before. He knew the people there. He had shared food with them, exchanged words, felt the hospitality that the Inuit were known to offer any traveller who arrived cold and hungry at their door. So on that November morning in 1930, as he crossed the frozen edges of Lake Anjikuni and the familiar outline of the settlement came into view, he wasn't nervous. He was tired. He was cold. He was looking forward to a fire and a meal. He never got either. About 100 yards from the village, Joe stopped walking. Something was wrong. He could feel it before he understood it. The village was silent. Not the comfortable quiet of sleeping people or a community at rest. This was different. This was the silence of absence. He called out. Nothing answered. He called again. The wind took his voice and gave it back to no one. He walked toward the huts.
Inside the first one, a pot of stew sat over a fire that had long since gone cold. The food was still there, untouched, as if the person who cooked it had simply stepped outside for a moment and never returned. In another dwelling, a sealskin garment lay on the floor with a needle still threaded through it. Whoever had been sewing it had stopped mid-stitch. The food racks outside, built to hold the winter's supply of dried fish, were still full. Months of stored food, enough to sustain 25 people through the Arctic winter, left behind. Joe walked the perimeter of the village. Every hut, every tent, every structure. He found no bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle, no indication that anyone had fought or fled in panic. The village looked like a photograph of a life interrupted, frozen in the exact moment before something happened. Then he found the dogs. 7 sled dogs, still tethered to their posts near the edge of the camp. They hadn't been set free. They hadn't been taken.
They had been left tied, in place, and they had starved to death. This, perhaps more than anything else, told Joe how long they had been gone. Sled dogs were not accessories to Arctic life. This, perhaps more than anything else, told Joe how long they had been gone. Sled dogs were not accessories to Arctic life. They were survival. No one, not under any rational circumstance, leaves their dogs behind. They are the difference between making it home and not making it at all. Whoever left this village did not plan to leave. And then he found the grave. At the edge of the village, beneath the snow, was a burial site, or what had been one. The stones that had ringed the grave were stacked neatly to one side. The earth had been dug open, and the body that had been buried there was gone. No animal tracks, no claw marks, no disturbance in the snow around the stones. Something or someone had opened that grave with care, with intention.
Joe Labelle had seen a lot of things in the wilderness. He had dealt with cold and danger and the indifferent cruelty of nature. But this felt like something else entirely. He left the village. He found the nearest telegraph station, and he reported what he had seen to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The Mounted Police arrived at Lake Anjikuni within days. They confirmed everything Joe had described: the abandoned meals, the unfinished garments, the starved dogs, the disturbed grave. They estimated, based on the condition of the food and the dogs, that the villagers had been gone for approximately 8 weeks before Labelle arrived. 8 weeks. That means they vanished sometime in September, before the worst of the winter cold, before the lake fully froze, before the long darkness settled in. They had left at the worst possible time, or been taken at it. The investigators spread out across the surrounding tundra. They searched for tracks, for campsites, for any trace of 25 people moving through the landscape. The tundra, for all its emptiness, holds impressions. Heavy feet, heavy sleds, they leave marks.
There were none. Here is where the story begins to fracture. The RCMP later issued a statement saying they had no official record of any investigation at Lake Anjikuni. No file, no case number, no report. The same officers who, by multiple accounts, had visited the site denied it had ever happened. Why would they deny it? There are broadly 3 schools of thought. The first is that the whole story was embellished, that Labelle found an empty seasonal camp, that the Inuit had simply moved, as nomadic peoples often do, and that a journalist with a flair for the dramatic turned a mundane migration into a century-long mystery. It's a reasonable argument. It's also, if you follow the details closely, incomplete. Because the sled dogs don't fit. Because the unfinished sewing doesn't fit. Because an Inuit community in 1930 does not leave their winter food stores and their dogs and their dead without cause.
The second theory is darker: forced relocation. The Canadian government in the early 20th century had a documented history of moving Indigenous communities without notice, without consent, and without record keeping that served those communities. It is entirely possible, some researchers argue probable, that the residents of Lake Anjikuni were taken, resettled, and that official silence was deliberate, not supernatural, just institutional. The kind of erasure that governments are very good at. The third theory is the one that people whisper: the lights. Several witnesses, trappers in the region that autumn, reported seeing strange lights in the sky above Lake Anjikuni. Not the northern lights, which every person in that part of Canada knows intimately. These were different, pulsing, bluish,
moving with a kind of deliberateness that natural phenomena don't have. Even some RCMP officers in private accounts mentioned the lights. Not officially, not on record, just mentioned them.
In the decades that followed, the story of Lake Anjikuni became something of a legend in northern Canada. Each retelling added details. The population grew from 25 to hundreds, then to thousands. UFO researchers attached themselves to it. Tabloids ran photographs of other places, claiming they were the deserted village. The real story, whatever it was, got buried under the weight of everything people wanted it to be. What we know for certain is this. A man named Joe Labelle arrived at a settlement on the shores of Lake Anjikuni in November 1930. The settlement was empty. The evidence of sudden, unexplained departure was real. An investigation occurred. And then, officially, it didn't. 25 people, real people, with names and families and half-finished needlework, were never accounted for. Not one of them. Ever. There is a particular quality to mysteries that involve real people. People with faces and lives and unfinished work on their floors.
They don't let go of you the way a story does. Because they aren't stories. They are absences. They are the shape of something that should be there and isn't. Lake Anjikuni is still there. The Kazan River still runs through it. The tundra still stretches to every horizon. If you stood on its shore today, and very few people ever do, you would hear exactly what Joe Labelle heard when he stood there 90-some years ago. Wind, water, and nothing else. Investigators closed the case, more or less, by not opening it. Journalists moved on to the next story. The world turned. But somewhere in the official silence, in the gap between what happened and what was recorded, 25 people are still waiting to be found. The strangest thing about Lake Anjikuni isn't what disappeared. It's that no one in power ever seemed to want to find it.